Hi guys, welcome back to Sacred Vedic Astrology. My name is Samantha and I feel so blessed and so lucky to be a professional Vedic sidereal astrologer. So today we have a really fascinating chart to analyze, and this is one that I have studied for so long because I was really fascinated by Sylvia Plath. Most of my life, I always thought her story was very fascinating. And when I found out we had A-level accuracy, excellent birth data, I was so excited to unravel her Vedic sidereal astrological chart. So Sylvia lived a very intense sort of life, right? She had a very intense life story, a very intense life experience, riddled with loss and death and extremes and highs and lows and ups and downs and great intellect and this really amazing analytical sort of mind and so much poetry and a fascinating love story. So there's truly so much to unravel in Sylvia's Vedic astrological chart, and I'm really excited to get into it. So before we start unraveling this chart, which if you guys know anything about Vedic astrology, you're probably looking at this and whoa, this is wild. This is a wild one. Yes, it is. Before we start unraveling, we are going to go into a little bit of a biography about Sylvia's life story. So the reason I want to do this specifically for Sylvia is because she has so many points of her life story that we are going to see in the Vedic astrological chart, eerily so, right? Eerily so. So I'm going to go through a quick biography. If you guys already know a lot about Sylvia Plath, you can skip through this part and just get to the chart analysis. But I find this to be one of those charts I really want to give a little bit of a background and some context on. Okay, so Sylvia Plath was born October 27th, 1932 in Boston, Massachusetts. So her father was an immigrant and a professor who died when she was only 8 years old. So her life already starts off with this major loss, right? Very early on, it gave her a lot of grief and abandonment. And his death really affected Sylvia because they were close, right? And he died when she was so young. So the death shows up in her journals and one of her most infamous poems that is about the father. All right. So she was an exceptional student. She's publishing poems by the age of 8 years old. She won awards, she was earning these top grades, she was presented as this perfect sort of girl, this perfect image, which is something that she grappled with a lot throughout her life experience was, perfectionism, essentially, which we'll get into, because on the outside, she was this amazing student, she was winning the awards, she was getting scholarships for school, and she was writing these amazing, pieces, but deep down, she was struggling with a lot of mental health issues. Okay, so she goes to Smith College on a scholarship, and she publishes stories and poems in these major magazines, and she won an editorship in New York, which was essentially like a dream opportunity, but it left her disillusioned. So, the same year, she experienced her first major depressive episode where she attempts suicide for the first time and then she's institutionalized. Okay, so she gets electroshock therapy when she has this experience, and this is a premise for her book, The Bell Jar. All right, so then she returns to school, graduates with honors. Here we go, we're back to the image that she's trying to fit into of being perfect and intellect, doing well at school, etc., etc. And she was really praised as like the golden girl of these American letters, even though deep down she was really unraveling. All right, so in 1956, she is in Cambridge, England, where she meets Ted Hughes, a magnetic British poet. And she was instantly infatuated by Ted. All right. Their connection was electric, passionate, poetic, intense, highs, lows, ups, downs. All right, so they marry very quickly, and they have 2 children together. And they move between the US and England, pursuing their writing careers together. And their whole marriage was based on poetry. It was all about poetry, right? They were 2 of the most talented poets at the time. And if you look at interviews and find information about their relationship, it was really about poetry more than anything else. They were inspiring each other through their poetic talent. Now, they're supporting each other's career, and Sylvia's a mother and trying to go after her own creative ambitions. And their relationship grows very strained with time. Hughes has affairs, and he has a very notable affair with this woman named Asia. And Sylvia basically gave everything to Ted Hughes. She gave her mind, her loyalty, her body, etc., but she could not keep him, right? She could not keep Ted Hughes, which is, oh my goodness, such a manifestation of Ketu in the 7th house. So we will get into that. Ketu is something we cannot hold on to, something we cannot grasp. It's in her 7th house of marriage. Isn't that wild? We'll get into that through chart analysis. Another really interesting aspect about their relationship that is lesser known is Ted Hughes was very into the occult, and he had this like time period where he was bringing Sylvia into these occult practices. They had a Ouija board that they would play together. He got her into these tarot cards. For whatever reason, Ted was dabbling in the occult arts, which is very fascinating, right? Because we would think that maybe Sylvia would be the one that would have been more interested, but she was more of like an intellect. She believed in magic, actually. She said in an interview that when she was younger, she believed so strongly in magic, and then her life unfolded in a more, dramatic way, and so she stopped believing as much in magic, is the way that she says that. But Ted was getting her into tarot cards and astrology, and all of that sort of occult stuff was coming about in their relationship, which we'll also see in her 7th house with her Jupiter-Ketu conjunction. We'll get into all of that. Yes, it's there, but really fascinating relationship that was very tumultuous. Okay, so Sylvia and Ted separate because he is having an affair, and she's living in this flat in London in the middle of this like harsh, really cold winter, raising their 2 children alone. All right, so she writes many of these like fiery, intense poems, and they eventually become Ariel. Her poems become darker, more rageful, more intense, and she's, probably spiraling a lot into depression. So on February 11th, 1963, at the age of 30, she commits suicide, unfortunately. All right. So after her death, her work reaches global acclaim. Her journals become these sort of sacred texts for women. She had a very strong connection to women through her work. Her life becomes this subject of analysis. What was going on with Sylvia? Let's unravel it. Let's analyze it, etc., etc. And she was really a voice of brilliance, but also pain and suffering as well, too. So really, really fascinating. Her work was riddled with, suffering and depth and intensity and loss. And these are the major themes of her work. All right, so, Sylvia Plath is notorious. If anyone has taken a literary course in school, you have heard about Sylvia Plath. You've studied her. She was a really, really fascinating, iconic figure, right? So her life is riddled with ups and downs and highs and lows and loss and death and intensity and extremes. Of course, we're going to see all of that in the Vedic astrological chart. All right, so let's get into it, y'all. Okay, so here is Sylvia Plath's Vedic astrological chart. Isn't that fascinating? So let us start with the 1st house or the ascendant, as always, for chart analysis. So Sylvia was an Aquarius ascendant, and she gets Rahu in her first house. Rahu's in the first, Ketu's in the seventh. Mars aspects her first by its eighth aspect, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we also get Mars influence onto the first. We get Mars influence onto Rahu. So we're getting this like Mars Rahu influence into the first house or onto the ascendant. So what's fascinating about Rahu in the first is that Rahu in the first house is a life of extremes, a life of highs, a life of lows, a life of ups, downs, like that. And her life was like that, right? And because Rahu's in the first, she's actually here to learn about the self, learn who she is outside of these like societal norms, societal expectations. And she's here to embody this more unconventional sort of person, right? She's not here to follow the norms of society with Rahu in the first. She was really here to carve her own path and do something in a way that was more individualistic, especially because Rahu is an Aquarius, right? So because we also get Mars' influence onto the first, Sylvia was a very sort of intense, fiery personality, actually. She wasn't this woe is me victim throughout her life. She suffered with highs and lows and depression, yes, but the documentary I was watching about Sylvia, they were talking about how even after the suicide attempt, she said something along the lines of her body would not let her because she had so much energy and so much drive and so much in her to keep going. So that's going to be that Rahu in the first with that Mars influence. It's fiery, it's motivated, it's intense. She could be very intense in her energy and her personality, right? And what's also fascinating about Rahu in the first is usually with the Rahu first house, Ketu seventh house axis, someone attracts some sort of karmic, sort of past life relationship that is there to eventually be let go of so that the person can learn about who they actually are outside of the relationship dynamic, right? That's like the Rahu first, Ketu seventh axis. She was learning how to get out of these codependency tendencies that she had, right? Ketu in the seventh is like, okay, in the past lives, she relied fully on other people. She relied on others for validation. She relied on the marriage partner, the spouse. And she fell back into her Ketu placement in this lifetime because she was very dependent on Ted. She gave everything to him, as we learned in her life story. She gave it all to him and he still left. He still had the affairs, etc. So she was more so living in that Ketu. She was falling into that Ketu karma of the past lives where she gave everything to a relationship, to a spouse, to a marriage, and then lost herself in the process. When this lifetime of the opposite, right? She was here to learn about herself, develop herself outside of those codependent aspects of marriage. So that's kind of eerie. It gives me chills. That's her whole karmic access point. Okay, so first house ruler is Saturn. So her first ruler goes into the 12th house. Her Saturn's very strong in Capricorn in the 12th house. So this is a strong Saturn, right? So the 12th ruler is in the 12th ruler. So first ruler in the 12th would show that Sylvia had a theme of foreign travels. She was going to different countries, which she did, right? She went to schooling in different countries. She was traveling. She lived in London, etc. So that already checks out. 12th house is also the house of loss, right? 12th house is a very intense sort of moksha house, which means someone is learning about how to let go, how to deal with loss and more difficult experiences with the first ruler in the 12th. And that was a huge aspect of her life, was loss as well too. Now, interestingly enough, the 12th house rules like mental hospitals, institutions, and of course, not every single chart that has the first ruler in the 12th house is going to show someone who ends up in a mental hospital. You know what I mean? Like, we're not going to predict that for every chart, but it just so happens that she did end up in a institution at one point in her life with that first ruler in the 12th house of institutions and places that someone goes to retreat. So also with the first ruler in the 12th house, there's a major theme of solitude, isolation, which was also a huge point of her life story as well too. She felt very alone, very misunderstood. At the end of her life, she was literally left by her husband with these 2 kids to take care of on her own in a foreign land, in a different country, in London, right? That's first ruler in the 12th house, Saturn in the 12th. Best believe it. Okay, so that's a really huge part of her life story. And whenever the first house is ruled by a Distana house, the 6th house, the 8th house, the 12th house, it's not going to be the most easy life experience because these are, houses of suffering, right? They're not easy houses. And her first ruler is in the 12th, her moon is in the 8th, Mars is in the 6th. We see this highlight of Distana houses, 6, 8, and 12. There's planets in those houses, best believe it. Okay, so we also get Saturn opposite a debilitated Mars in the 6th, right? So Saturn opposite Mars is not easy because this is showing some conflict between structure and order and passion and drive and ambition. So she's sort of at odds with these 2 parts of herself, right? The Saturn is like structure, order, discipline, parental figures. And then Mars is that part of her that's more fiery, more feisty, more passionate. So there's some point of contention between those 2 planetary energies, right? These are like 2 malefics aspecting each other in opposition, okay? Which we can see because she was always trying to do the more structured thing and go to school and the education. But then there was also that Mars part of her that was very fiery and intense and passionate, and also was very wanting to kind of get outside of these societal norms and boxes that were placed upon her as well too. Now, her Mars is debilitated in the 6th house, and it is at what I would see as the Gandanta point in Vedic astrology. So when a planet goes into the late degree of a water sign, early degree of a fire sign, it is Gandanta, which means that it is like a spiritual knot. Now, eerily enough, a Gandanta planet can also mean that someone has a near-death experience that connects to drowning or connects to water. And I believe she almost drove into a river or something. She had some connection to almost drowning. But more than anything, when planets are at a Gandanta point, it shows that someone feels like they're drowning. There's a lot of suffering. There's overwhelm. It's a spiritual knot. So it's something they have to untangle themselves from or release themselves from. So she has a debilitated Mars in the 6th house, opposite Saturn, in the Gandanta degree. This is a difficult Mars. And in the Bhava chart, which would be the chart that shows us where the planets might more accurately sit. So it's both things with the Bhava chart. It's like Mars is in the 6th, but Mars is also in the 7th in the Bhava chart. And this would actually make a lot of sense for Mars to be in her 7th house because in her marriage to Ted Hughes, there was fighting, there was perhaps violence. There was a lot of Mars in the marriage, and that would be Kuja dosha if Mars goes into the 7th in the Bhava chart. So with the Bhava chart, it's like the planet is in both houses. You just have to understand that it's going to bring on some energies of both. It's not one, it's not the other, it is both with the Bhava chart. So her Mars is Gandanta point in the 6th, in Cancer, debilitated. We see some 6th house issues, which would be some issues with daily motivation. Perhaps she struggled a lot of the times to get herself up and get herself motivated. Also, it would show some health issues as well too. And it would also show issues with Mars, right? Which would be fire, which would be the way that she committed suicide was very connected to fire, right? With that debilitated Mars at the Gandanta point in the 6th house, aspected by Saturn. We see issues with that Mars for sure. And it's that Gandanta point, which means to feel like one is drowning. And this is a chart where I would have told Sylvia to stay away from water. Don't get near water. Don't, risk anything near water because there can be some near-death experiences near water as well too. Okay. So that is that, right? The spiritual knot that she is disentangling herself from. She feels like she's drowning in this lifetime. She feels like there's overwhelm of the emotions. And it's also going to show us with a debilitated Mars that her aggression, her anger, her passion is not so well contained because it's acting in its not highest form in Cancer. So it's like emotional outbursts, emotional aggression. Like it can be either too much anger that's expressed overtly, or it's anger that's very hidden and very subdued and not so expressed as well too with debilitated Mars. Okay, so that is that. Gandanta point, feel like one is drowning, karmic spiritual knot. You know, it's not an easy sort of lifetime for Sylvia. And that's also a Distona house, right? Okay, so then let's move on to her 7th house. And remember, in the Bhava chart, it's as if Mars is in the 6th house and the 7th house. So we get some Mars influence into the marriage with Jupiter, Ketu as well too. Okay, now this is where things get eerie. So we see Neptune, we see Jupiter, we see Ketu. Jupiter's 23 degrees, Ketu's 20, they're at the same exact degree point. So this is the 7th house of marriage. Okay, so Ketu is a past life sort of karmic relationship or marriage that someone has to let go of. Contains a lot of karma when Ketu sits in the 7th. It's detachment, but it's also spirituality. So it can give a very spiritual partner. Now, Jupiter is a partner that is like a guide, a guru, a teacher, a mentor to some degree. Okay, now Neptune is here. Neptune is spirituality, deception, illusion, deceit. All right, and 7th house is Leo, so 7th ruler is in the 9th house, right near Mercury. So let's break this down because this is eerie. This is eerily accurate. Okay, Jupiter Ketu. A past life relationship that she has to let go of, Neptune full of deceit, and someone who is like a mentor, guide, or teacher. Now, Ted was older. He was like a guide, a mentor, a teacher to her. There was deceit, deception, illusion, but also spirituality in the relationship. Remember earlier, I discussed how he got Sylvia into the occult sciences. That's Ketu, that's Neptune, 2 indications of spirituality. And there was a lot of karma in that relationship, and also it was something she had to let go of because of that Ketu influence. Okay, that's already the whole relationship. And with the Bhava chart, Mars goes into the 7th, which is Kuja dosha, which would show potential for an early divorce or potential for anger, violence, aggression in the marriage. Passion, intensity, which was also a part of the marriage if we take the Bhava chart. Okay. Now, the 7th ruler is in the 9th house near Mercury. So, 7th ruler in the 9th would show that they meet through schooling or higher education. They met through schooling and higher education. It would also show that they travel together or have some connection to foreign lands. They did travel together. They met in a different country than the one that Sylvia was raised in. 9th house is also like father, guru, guide, teacher. So again, he was like a father, guru, guide, and teacher to her. It's also the 7th ruler is right near Mercury, so he was an intellect, he was a writer, and he was connected to schooling and education because of that Mercury influence onto the 7th lord. Okay, so again, they meet in connection to school, writing, education. Can't really get much more eerily accurate than that. If Sylvia was a client and I was like, hey, this is, what your spouse might be like, she'd be like, oh, that's exactly who he is if you wrote a biography about him, right? Like that. Okay. So we see all of that, right? She's relying on Ted as a mentor, as a guide, as a teacher. It's very karmic. It's also fiery with Mars in the 7th in the Bhava chart. It's karmic. It's past life. They've done this dance before. Okay. And then she eventually has to let go with Ketu in the 7th. All right, so that's all of that, right? And 7th house is also going to be like business partnerships, and, their relationship was based on poetry and their mutual love for writing. So there was that sort of business partnership aspect of it as well, too. Okay. Now, let's move on to this Venus-Moon conjunction in the 8th house. This is really, really important. So Venus is debilitated in Virgo in the 8th house. So. This is fascinating. So when a planet is debilitated, it's going to cause some harm for the other planets, but not so much vice versa. So let me get into this, right? So the Venus is debilitated. So it might cause some issues for the moon, right? Because the moon is with a debilitated Venus. But the moon isn't going to cause issues for the Venus as much, right? So the Venus is the karaka for the arts. There's still Venus issues because it's in the 8th house, the Dastana house. And more so if like a karaka has issues, it will cause the issues for the person as opposed to the arts so much. So we get a debilitated Venus next to the moon in the 8th house, which would show creative talent, right? Venus is the karaka of the arts, it's with the moon, so the mind, the mental energy is creative. She's always thinking about art, she's always thinking about creativity, right? Like that. But the debilitated Venus is going to cause some issues in relationships or marriage, right? So it's more like that when a planet is debilitated in the 8th house. Okay. Now, Moon Venus is also very interesting because it will show that there's a part of her that just wants to feel good all the time. She wants to feel good, escape, you know, she might have had some connection to like escaping, drugs, alcohol at some point, etc. And that Moon Venus is very creative. It's a classic creative conjunction. But it's in the 8th house, in a difficult house that's all about psychology, the depths of everything, intense life experiences, death, loss, transformation, etc. So she had a lot of early death, early loss of the father, and a lot of psychological turmoil, right? Moon in the 8th house is not an easy placement. We do get that Venus influence, which is helping out, right? There's some help there. But more so it's going to be better for the arts and creativity, not so great for the mind because of that moon in the 8th house. So it's not one, it's not the other, it's both things are true. Okay. All right. So now the 8th house ruler is in the 9th. 9th house ruler is in the 8th. So now we get a Parivartan yoga between the 8th house and the 9th house, between Mercury and Venus, baby. So this is really, really potent because Mercury is a karaka for writing and education. Venus is a karaka for the arts. So her Mercury gets stronger, her Venus gets stronger, Parivartan yoga, and it shows us that she's able to creatively write, right? Because Venus is a karaka for the arts, Mercury is a karaka for the written word, education, and the mind. So now we get strong mental energy, we get a strength of education, we get a strength of writing, and we get a strength of the arts and beauty, right? Poetry, you know, what would be more poetic than a Parivartan yoga strength of Mercury and Venus, the creative arts and writing and education, which was her whole life story. Okay, so the thing about Parivartan yoga is because it is with an 8th house energy, exchanging, mutual exchange, we still get a strength of the 8th house in connection to the 9th house, so the good and the bad, right? So her father died at a very young age. 9th house is the father. Sun is also the father, and 8th house is death and loss. So the 9th ruler is in the 8th house, early death and loss of the father, and Sun is debilitated in Libra. Sun does not like to be in Libra, and then it's hit by Mars. So Mars is aspecting Libra, which is opposite of Aries, so it's opposite the sign that Mars wants to be in. The Sun is already in a weak placement. We see issues for the Sun, issues for the father. Hit by Mars, Sun is out of whack in Libra, and then the 9th ruler is in the 8th, death and loss. 8th ruler is in the 9th, death and loss of the father. Okay. Also, Jupiter, which can be a karaka or an indication of the father, as well as the Sun. So the Sun is, you know, poorly aspected. Jupiter is with Ketu. Ketu is loss, right? So early loss of a mentor, guide, which would be the father. And then in the Bhava chart, remember that it's hit by Mars. So then Mars is with Jupiter, Ketu is with Jupiter, issues for an early mentor, guide, the father. Okay, so that's all of that. All right. Now, the issue with the Sun would also bring about issues with confidence, self-worth, and self-esteem as well too. Now, another important aspect of the Venus-Moon conjunction is it's in the sign of Virgo, which is the sign of perfectionism, right? And her whole life was riddled with this idea of being perfect, essentially. She had this perfectionistic tendency. Interestingly enough, Venus is in the sign of being perfectionistic, right? So her art was very much focused on how can I make it better? How can I be better? How can I improve? And her moon sign nakshatra is in the Hasta nakshatra, which connects to the hands, right? So Hasta is about using your hands, and she was a writer, right? So she was always using her hands, quite literally. Okay. Now, Parivartan Yoga between the 9th house, 8th house strengthens, the Venus, Mercury, but still gives us those 8th house issues, psychological issues, death, early loss of the father, and extreme ups and downs in the emotional nature. There's also going to be some interest in the occult or the psychological or the spiritual at some point because of that 8th house influence, which I discussed earlier. Ted Hughes got her briefly into the occult, right? So there was that point of her life as well too. But don't ever kid yourself with the moon in the 8th house. It's not an easy placement by any means. Highs, lows, ups, downs, psychological depth, experiences of transformation, loss, etc. Luckily, there's Venus. Luckily, there's the Parivartan Yoga. So it's going to be good for the arts, for creativity, for writing, for education, but it's still difficult. Okay. Now, we get Sun, Mercury in the 9th house of Libra. So again, the Sun, we have some Sun issues because of Mars. Because Sun is in Libra, it doesn't want to be in Libra. It's hit by Mars that does not want to aspect Libra. So we get issues with the Sun, Mercury, but we also get influence from Rahu. So Rahu's going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Rahu's on the Sun, Rahu's on Mercury, Rahu's on the 9th house. And the 9th house is higher learning, philosophy, education. So Mercury is a karaka for education, and it's in a house that connects to higher education. So she did amazingly well in education, travel, learning. All of those themes are very prominent with that Sun, Mercury in the 9th, hit by Rahu. So when Rahu aspects planets or houses, it means that someone's actually meant to go towards that house energy or that planetary energy. So going towards, developing her sense of confidence, leadership, also going towards Mercury, which is writing, education, all the mercurial themes, and also her Atmakarika, her highest degree planet, is Mercury in the 9th house, which would be writing, higher education, travel, philosophical thought, and all of those themes as well too. All right, Mercury is also the intellect, so she has a very strong mind, a very strong intellect with that Mercury in the 9th. Now, with Sun Mercury in the 9th, this means that Sun Mercury aspects directly by opposition the 3rd house, right? So 3rd house would be writing, publishing as well too. 3rd house is more like publishing articles, themes like that, and also short travels as well too. So then we get 2 planets aspecting the 3rd, and Sun is onto its own sign of Aries in the 3rd house. Mercury is aspecting a house that connects to writing, and Mercury is a karaka for writing, education, and it's on to the 3rd house of publishing as well too. So then we get that planetary energy active in the 3rd house. Okay, so that's going to show us why she was so gifted and so connected to education. It's the Parivartan Yoga, it's Mercury karaka for writing and education and the mind in the 9th house, a house of education, philosophy, higher education, and then both planets aspect the 3rd house, which is also going to be writing, publishing, education as well too. And the arts, of course, the 3rd house is the house of the arts. And that Venus-Moon conjunction is a very creative conjunction that connects to the arts. And remember that Parivartan Yoga between Mercury and Venus, exchanging the energy between writing, education, and the arts, beauty, etc. Best believe it. Okay. What you'll find as well, too, is a Moon-Venus conjunction will show that someone has some special connection to women. So a lot of her work was also very focused on feminism, women. She had this strong theme and correlation in her work, specifically to the female experience in many ways as well, too. Okay. Now, what's also interesting is Saturn, by its 10th aspect, does also hit her Sun and her Mercury in the 9th. So that would show more issues for the father. That's a lot of intense influence onto the 9th for the father himself, but it shows a great deal of energy onto the 9th of education. So it's interesting. It's like mixed energies for the 9th house, where it's showing some issues with the father because too many malefics on a house is not going to be good for the person that house connects to. But it shows so much focus on that house because there's so many planets aspecting as well too. So Saturn onto the Sun would show, again, confidence issues with trusting herself, believing in herself. She'll have a lot of perfectionistic feelings towards herself because Saturn is like that discipline energy. It's onto her Sun of the way she views herself. And it's also onto the father, so early loss of the father as well too. All right, and then the Jupiter-Ketu conjunction being so tight together shows that she has some sort of like past life connection to, philosophical ideas, travel, perhaps her father was a very karmic sort of relationship as well too. Jupiter-Ketu is going to show some like past life themes because of Ketu around Jupiter. So she has also this more philosophical bend in her chart as well too. And again, she was like briefly introduced into the occult through Ted Hughes. So that's that Jupiter-Ketu in the 7th house, spiritual energy in the marriage, and the partner himself is going to be very Jupiter-Ketu. He's going to be spiritual, philosophical, like that. Okay. Now, also her Darakaraka, or her spouse indicator, is Venus in the 8th house, so that gives a creative, artistic spouse, but also in the house of loss and endings as well too. All right, so that's very fascinating. And also the Jupiter-Ketu, because it's in the 7th, it'll aspect the 1st house. So she also gets Jupiter influence onto the 1st. So we see Mars influences her 1st, Rahu and Jupiter. So Jupiter gives that slight benefic influence, right? So she has an ability to be seen, she has an ability to be lucky in certain ways, but then also it's Rahu and Mars, so it's really a mixed sort of 1st house in that way. There's like multiple things going on. She has some benefic influence. Rahu is an ability to be seen, be out in the world, be in the public, and she was in the public eye. She was famous, she was successful. Her legacy really lives on, right? And then Jupiter is going to show some theme of like some luck, some blessings in the lifetime, which she was also blessed and lucky to have so much creative talent and be able to be seen and, known for her work. Then that Mars influence also shows, anger, aggression. It's a malefic on the 1st. She might have some issue where she would like offend people at different points or be very aggressive in the way that she expressed herself as well too. So it's all these different things. It's not one, it's not the other, it's all when it comes to actual accurate astrological analysis. Let's look into her 7th house in the D9 Navamsha. Okay, so her 7th house is the moon in the D9, and the ruler goes into the 3rd. Of course it does. So moon in the 7th will show someone is very committed in their marriage. Even if things go wrong, they remain very committed to that partner, and she was very committed to Ted Hughes. 7th ruler is in the 3rd, which shows that the partner was interested in the arts, education, travel, writing, creativity. That's who he was. There he is. There Ted is again. It's just so funny. He shows up like exactly the way he was in her chart. All right, so that was the chart analysis of Sylvia Plath. That moon-Venus conjunction in Virgo, debilitated Venus in the 8th, really intense for the emotional nature, but also her art and her creativity and her writing and her publishing and her form of expression was very 8th house-like, right? It was about the highs and the lows and the depression she experienced and the loss of her father, right? 9th house ruler in the 8th, Venus, Mercury, Parivartan Yoga between the father and loss and death. She quite literally wrote a famous poem about the loss of her father, right? Like that. So really intense sort of life experience for Sylvia. 1st rulers in the 12th, the house of loss, Dastana house. Moon is in the 8th house, Dastana house. It's not really Mars debilitated, Gandon to degree. There's a lot of this activation of suffering and intense life experience. And, the thing about the Dastana houses is if someone works with that energy, they can actually have so much strength, right? This is also a chart where there's so much willpower, there's so much strength, there's so much ability to overcome. So unfortunately, I do think if she lived longer, she would have really lived out a more like fulfilling, whole sort of life, because the energy of this chart is also very motivated, very driven, very able to overcome obstacles. It is unfortunate. And also, I think, let's check this out, but I believe the suicide happened in her Rahu Dasha, which, oh man, the Rahu Dasha. I made a video on this before, and it's a little bit of a funny, but it's also very true that I remember this Vedic astrologer, Ernst Wilhelm, said, all you have to do in your Rahu Dasha is make it out alive. And I'll never forget when Ernst Wilhelm said that, because I was like, that's it. No, that's it. You just have to survive your Rahu Dasha. And unfortunately, she did not make it out of the Rahu Dasha. Let's check this out. Okay, Dasha sequence. I don't think it shows you guys the Dashas on your end, but okay, so she was in her Rahu Dasha from 12 to 30, and she would have went into her Jupiter Dasha right, oh man. Ugh, jeez, okay. So the suicide happened in the Rahu Mars, which is, the Mars is debilitated. It's in the 6th house. It's aspected by Saturn. That's difficult. They're in an opposition. Mars is at the point, which means to drown, right? So unfortunately, if she just made it a little bit longer, she would have left her Rahu Dasha, gone into her Jupiter Dasha. It's sad to see that Rahu Dashas can be very extreme. They can be very taxing on someone. They can be very intense. And it's interesting because her Rahu Ketu axis is the first 7th axis, so it's all about herself versus a relationship versus the marriage, and the karmic undertones of the marriage led her towards that path. So it's very, very sad to see that, because she was so close to the Jupiter Dasha. It was like right at the tail end of her Rahu Dasha. So it's like that. And also because Rahu's in the 1st, it aspects her 5th house. So in her Rahu Dasha, there's themes of the 5th house, which is children, which is, writing, expression. And then it also aspects the 9th onto her Sun, onto her Mercury. So then there's aspects of education, higher learning, travel, goes on to the Sun, goes on to Mercury, connects to Mercury, writing, teaching, education. So the Rahu Dasha is in the 1st, but it aspects the 5th and the 9th and brings in those elements of the 1st house, 5th house, and 9th house into the Rahu Dasha as well too. And Rahu's in her 6th house, in her D9 of Vamsha, so that would be a difficult house for her to go through as well too. All right, so the Rahu Dasha is intense. It's also aspected by Mars in her personal chart. So the Rahu Dasha was not easy for her, right? Rahu's ups, downs, highs, lows. Again, Ernst Wilhelm said all you got to do is survive a Rahu Dasha. It's like that. And as someone who started my Rahu Dasha when I was 13 years old, it's like that. Trust me, it is like that. Alrighty, so this was an in-depth analysis into Sylvia Plath's Vedic astrological chart. Hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know. I'm playing around with some different formatting. So in this video, I did a little biography. I went into life themes before analyzing the chart. I went a little into the Bhava chart. Did things a little differently. I brought in a little bit of analysis of the Dasha sequence. So let me know how you guys feel about this form of content. I felt like we had to go through all these different points. So let me know how you guys felt about this different form of video and chart analysis, and comment, like, and subscribe for more content coming soon. And let me know if you guys had a connection to Sylvia Plath. Did you study about her, read her poetry, learn about her in school? Very curious to know. She is such an iconic sort of figure who lived a very tragic life, unfortunately, and it is really wild to see how things play out through the Dasha sequence, right? Like, her whole adult life was a Rahu Dasha, which I can relate to because that's been my experience as well too. And going through the Rahu Dasha for most of your life is just like highs and lows and ups and downs. And it's a lot, but she was so close to the Jupiter Dasha. So I'm like, Sylvia, if she just made it to the Jupiter. But yeah, really fascinating. And she was really such an iconic figure of our time and such a strong intellect as well too. All right, so we will talk soon. Sending all the love. Bye, guys.